In this video, we will be discussing the influence of Putonghua, or Mandarin, in the country of China as well as around the world. To begin, let's look at the history of how Putonghua came to existence.
So, generally speaking, Putonghua has three precursors. First, the history of Putonghua could be traced back to 4,000 years ago. At that time, it was called Yawen, which means the elegant speech. It could be understood as the shared language at that time, like official language or standard language of today. But it was mainly popular in the upper class and scholars. Sometimes Yawen was still considered as the national language or standard language now because it is so affected by the Confucianism. And elegant is one of the main ideas of Confucianism. Secondly, based on the high position of Yawen, Guanhua, a more common and developed language, was established as the common language from the Yuan dynasty, like 750 years ago. It was generally referred to as the official language and the nation language. However, people from the North District may not understand people from the South because every district was allowed to have its own Guanhua. So, although there are some similarities among all Guanhua of every district in the standard characters of its shape and the standard pronunciation of the writing system, the strong regional difference still existed. In addition, it was still mainly used by officials, candidates for the civil service examination, the merchant class, and so on, so it was not extended to the ordinary people. The third one, also the last one, is Guoyu, which is literally explained as the unified national language, and it shares one linguistic foundation from the Guanhua. Guoyu emerged in the reform era of the late Qing dynasty in the early 20th century. With the revolution going on, feudalism was overthrown by the democratism and scientism, so Guoyu was used more generally by people in common than Guanhua. Different from Guanhua, Guoyu has a set of standards. For example, it had unified standards for pronunciation and grammar, and could distinguish between what was proper and improper. Finally, let's talk about how Putonghua came up. Literally speaking, Putonghua means the common language. The term of Putong was a term imported from Japan, and it emerged in the late Qing dynasty. Actually, the difference between Putonghua and Guoyu is so subtle that people always think they are the same thing. The word Putong was mainly popular in the proletariat at first, so with the new regime established by People's Republic of China, of course the proletariat in 1949, the word Guoyu was almost discarded in the mainland, and then the Putonghua became the one most people use.
On May 4, 1919, the May 4th movement took place in Beijing, causing a language reform. It advocated a shift from classical Chinese to the vernacular, from a dead language to a living one, and from a language that was divorced from the speech and everyday lives of ordinary people to one that actually reflected their experiences. Here, the living language meant Baihua, which Hu Shi and other May 4th electors defined as the language of vernacular narrative fiction. However, May 4th reformers didn't do the work of creating a language for ordinary people speaking in everyday lives. The language they held up as a new standard was not the people's language, because the vernacular Guoyu and Baihua was in fact the language of an educated and cosmopolitan minority. Furthermore, the May 4th excision of the vernacular from Wenyan, the classical Chinese, was more a rhetorical device and a political posture than an argument rooted in historical fact.
As the common language in China, Putonghua is the term used for Mandarin Chinese in mainland China, and was adopted at the People's Republic of China in 1955. It is mainly conducted at the level of Putonghua, in three principal forms of borrowing, building new words, and using old words in new forms.
So, why was Mandarin created as the standard language of Chinese? It was deliberately designed in the early 20th century to be distinct from any existing spoken vernacular, and was intended to be, within China, the language of all places and no particular place. Unlike classical Chinese, Mandarin is easier to learn and thus more widely accessible, and remakes the society's language situation to further national integration. Creating Mandarin was also an attempt to extend educational meritocracy from small segments of elites to all of society. In addition, one of the most familiar and recognizable features of Mandarin today is its reliance on the phonology of Beijing dialect. Zhou Youguang has written, taking Beijing pronunciation as the standard for Putonghua is the historical result of the more than 1,000 years that Beijing has been the capital of the Jin, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties and the following regimes. What's more, the minority dialects were not ignored. Even in the move towards bringing the standard in line with Beijing pronunciations, the language reformers sought to distinguish standard Mandarin from Beijing dialect in order to bridge regional differences. The steps taken by the members of the Duying Tongyihui represented a major step towards the standardization of Chinese phonology. They attempt to bridge the gap in practices among northern and southern Mandarin speakers by creating a standard that would be acceptable and somewhat familiar to as many people as possible. So, as we can see, Mandarin is not simply the descendants of Guanhua or Beijing speech. Sociologically speaking, the Guanhua of the Ming and Qing dynasties was a language of convenience for a very narrow class of people needing to communicate across regional boundaries, while the local speech of Beijing was the vernacular of a particular place. In contrast, Mandarin as the newly codified standard spoken language of a newly constituted Chinese nation-state was a uniform standard meant for all social classes and for all places in the nation.
As history continues onwards to today, Putonghua has also become more and more prevalent around the world, in which we can observe the effects of the globalization of the language. In 1987, the Chinese government established the Office of Chinese Language Council International, which established Confucius Institutes supporting Chinese language and cultural programs around the world. Today, approximately 30 million people around the world are learning Chinese as a second language. In the United States, the number of people studying in China increased by 25% in 2006 to 2007, and in 2007, AP Chinese exams were offered for the first time. In 2007, a popular Chinese song was released called The Chinese Language by SHE, a Taiwanese group. The last line of the song says, "The whole world is now learning Chinese. The language of Confucius is going global." One of the first things to discuss regarding the globalization of Putonghua is the identity associated with it. More than 2,000 years ago, Confucius cautioned that one could not successfully govern without first clarifying one's language. Language is fundamentally a social phenomenon. Along with the globalization of Putonghua also comes the challenges posed by the globalization of English. During the Cultural Revolution, as we have already discussed, learning English was severely denounced, but following the Cultural Revolution was the reform and opening policy, a national obsession with learning English, which was seen as a necessary tool in China's modernization and integration with the world.
The promotion of English emerged in 1980. It was viewed as a crucial means for gaining access to modern science and technology, and it evolved from a language for knowledge transfer to a language of communication with the West and dealing with the outside world. English education has advanced, and it is estimated that the number of English learners in China is exceeding 350 million.
Due to the rise of English in China, the ESL industry in China has boosted the economy. For example, Beijing reaped 700 million yuan in 2001 for the ESL industry. The spread of English in China has been criticized by some since it is seen as suppressing other languages and monopolizing world information. Some Chinese speakers fear that the impact of English will affect Chinese language and culture. Parents have also complained about children losing Chinese as a language, as well as the effects and pressures English poses on college students. On the other hand, Chinese businesses have transformed to align with the idea that English will make China stronger.
The promotion of both Putonghua and English research has focused mostly on institutional or public context. However, the parent's role on language planning influences the languages practiced within the home.
Obviously, family structures and linguistic influences are the most relevant factors in early stages of development. Children in different places are exposed to languages that are structurally closely related. They grow up in distinct environments, with various institutions, educational systems, family structures, and linguistic influences.
Parental influence and family language planning determine the degree of multilingualism in China. Both Putonghua and English education have been promoted since 1978. Parents are agents of language development implementation, and how they implement their family language policy directly affects the child's language development. Parents plan for activities related to language needs at school, and this interferes with providing the needed resources for heritage language development. Heritage language development refers to the minority language learned at home and may not fully develop since it is in competition with the dominant language of the society. A study among 3 ethnic groups, Pakistani, Italian, and Chinese, found that while heritage language books and resources were abundant within the groups, Chinese parents engaged less frequently than parents from other language groups in shared reading with their children. These practices that are guided by strong parental agency do not foster a rich linguistic environment for heritage language development. According to a study of 8 Chinese families, Chinese middle-class parents implement family language policies for 3 different languages in their everyday lives: Fengyin, Putonghua, and English. Grandparents live in the homes with the parents and the grandchildren, and grandparents speak Fengyin while the parents and children focus more on the social and educational languages of Putonghua. The heritage language was not as important to the parents for the children to maintain, and parents focused more on the language for the world rather than on preserving their heritage language. The language practice in the families studied featured 3 interrelated characteristics. 1, the cultural emotional detachment from Fengyin. 2, the languages were hierarchically ordered. And 3, the strong language management measures were implemented. The cultural emotional attachment to the minority language, Fengyin, was absent in parent discourse. This detachment could be explained by the rise of English, as it pushes Fengyin out of the home language, majority language diglossic dynamics, a situation in which 2 languages, or 2 varieties of the same language, are used under different conditions within a community, often by the same speakers. A linguistic hierarchy is a strong factor influencing parental agency regarding which languages the parents want to keep and which ones they want to let go. In implementing family language planning, parents claim their responsibility or assumed lack of power to create language environments for their children's multilingual development. Language management through parental agency was reflected through strong aspirations for their children's future. A focus on learning English is seen as most important through the eyes of Chinese parents, and the active agency to manage multiple language learning in Western countries are valued.
According to the comparison of vocabulary scores, the development of non-classified grammatical function words common to Putonghua and Cantonese was assessed both in terms of age and the vocabulary size at which these terms are required. Mandarin-speaking children are reported to outperform Cantonese-speaking children in the size of their vocabulary. Understanding both linguistic and social cultural influences that play a role in the pace at which vocabulary evolves and in the expansion of a particular grammatical class within the child's lexicon is expanded by comparison development profiles for two closely related languages in two culturally different Chinese cities. Aside from the distance-related factors, other potential differences include the function of reduced number of syllables and Mandarin vs. Canton phonological density. There are many similarities between the various Mandarin dialects, including the multiple northern and southern dialects. Cantonese and Mandarin belong to the same language group. They are, however, mutually incompatible, with distinctive phonological inventors and lexical gaps. Use the term Putonghua rather than Mandarin. The term more commonly used in English-speaking circles in the name of the form to emphasize that we are reporting on the results of a vocabulary instrument that was designed by and with a particular set of users in mind, those who consider themselves to be Putonghua speakers.
In 2004, approximately 53% of China's population was able to communicate in Putonghua, in which urban areas are more successful than rural areas. Mass formal education, mass media, and administrative measures all use Putonghua to communicate. This was perhaps a result of the 2001 Law of the People's Republic of China on the use of Chinese languages and Chinese characters, which was the first law on language and writing saying that Putonghua would be the principal language of broadcast in media, movies, school education, and administration. It also strongly discouraged public use of all other languages or dialects, leading to a sharp decline in dialects spoken in which the long-standing tradition of diglossia, the use of more than one dialect in a community, has tilted toward the dominance of one common language. After the 2001 language law, there was actually more of a push to use regional dialects through TV, film, the internet, and books. This was a grassroots effort to promote local dialects, and the use of dialect in local media asserts the values of pluralism and diversity to help construct a distinct local linguistic and cultural identity. Then came the State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television, also known as SARFT, which enforced regulations to promote a pure, normative Mandarin, but this was also challenged by new vocabulary and linguistic innovations through society, eventually leading to a SARFT regulation in 2005 where broadcasting hosts were required to use Putonghua. But now this is harder to maintain during the internet age. There's actually a new language, the internet language, known as Huoxingwen, or language from Mars, which is considered a social dialect.
English education is not only implemented in the majority areas, but also in minority communities. China is a multinational country with 56 nationalities, among which Han majority comprises nearly 91.5% of the whole, and the rest are 55 minority groups, taking up 8.5% approximately. Due to the popularity of English and pressure of globalization, minorities were encouraged to cultivate trilingual education, which include their home minority languages, Putonghua, and English. Minority languages are divided into three types based on the history of written minority languages and use in local education. In the first group, communities mainly residing along China's borders had widely used scripts before 1949 and are still used in education till now. The second group, minorities who have scripts before 1949 but occasionally have been used in education since then, mainly living in the southwest part. The last group refers to the other 42 ethnic communities who did not have a full script or even no script before 1949, resulting in rare use in education. Also, linguistic practices in minority areas have been categorized into four groups based on how well minorities speak their home minority languages, compared with Mandarin as well as the distance from Han people. The first group lives in remote autonomous regions with large populations, in which only young educated people can speak Mandarin, while others only speak and understand their home minority languages. The second group lives with Han people and also has large populations. They mainly communicate in minority languages, and most also can speak Mandarin. The third group includes communities that have convenient transportation, and they communicate in Mandarin, but only a few old people can speak minority languages. The final group has a small population and lives with other large minority groups, resulting in several multilinguals. Multilingual education was introduced in minority areas to improve literacy, ensure internal stability, and allow knowledge transfer to strengthen the country. Modes of multilingual education are classified into 4 models: the accretive, balanced, transitional, and depreciative models, among which the first 2 models are additive, while the other 2 are subtractive in trilingual education. Overall, mastering Chinese for minority students is beneficial for their higher study and career, especially for those who pursue more and better opportunities in major cities. When introducing Chinese education, minority language education is also needed to maintain ethnic identities and cultures. However, limited good teacher and textbooks make it challenging to implement in some remote ethnic minority areas, and English education is still far from national standard.
And as we look at the historical timeline and relationship between English and Mandarin in the context of China, we see the dominant influence of Putonghua in China with majority and minority languages, as well as the influence of Putonghua in the world. This impact is not limited just to language or education, but it also influences the spread of culture and traditions.